Willie Nelson, the legendary country singer known for his timeless hits, has shocked fans with a deeply personal confession. In a raw and emotional moment, he reveals the real reason behind his desire for it all to end. It's not what you think. After decades of performing, living life in the spotlight, and overcoming personal challenges, Willie opens up about the pain and struggles that have led him to this point. What he says will leave you questioning everything. Don't miss this emotional reveal. Willie Nelson's story starts in the heart of the Great Depression, a time when life was tough for everyone, but even harder for a little boy born into a broken home. Born on April 29, 1933, in Abbott, Texas, Willie's early years were marked by instability. His father, a man constantly moving from job to job, wasn't around much. Willie's mother, too, was absent early in his life, leaving him with a memory of her walking down a dusty road and never returning. For a child, that's a kind of abandonment that goes deep, one that shapes you before you even understand what it means to be loved. When Willie was still young, his father remarried and left again, and he and his older sister Bobby were sent to live with their grandparents. Though they didn't have much, his grandparents offered love, which Willie would later come to cherish. His grandfather, a blacksmith, handed him his first guitar at the age of 6. The guitar was too big for Willie, but it was the beginning of a journey that would define his life. He would strum clumsy notes, not knowing they were the first steps in filling the silence that had been his constant companion. At the age of 6, he lost his grandfather too to pneumonia. It's one of those moments in life that sticks with you, not just because of the loss, but because of the way the air feels when someone takes their last breath. Willie stood beside his grandfather's bed, counting the pauses between his breaths, unsure if he should stop counting, fearing that if he did, the air would stop too. It's one of those early experiences that shape a person's relationship with both love and loss. Willie was a boy of only 7 when he started working the cotton fields, his hands rough from the hard labor, trying to help provide for the family. The scorching heat of summer and the cold of winter didn't help, but hunger always had a stronger presence. That hunger was never just for food, it was for something more. Willie sang in bars at night, trying to fill the empty space in his soul. He wasn't chasing fame. No, he was singing to survive, to find something in himself that was worth holding on to. His voice trembled through smoky rooms and dimly lit bars, and although the crowd wasn't always paying attention, every note was a small defiance against the silence and loneliness of his life. By the time he was 9, he was performing with the Bohemian Pula Band. His voice was still rough, but it was real. No one was looking for a polished performance from a kid with a guitar, but he sang anyway because he had to. He didn't sing for applause. He sang to prove he was alive. His music, full of rawness and emotion, became his escape, his refuge from the struggles he faced every day. He sang not just for the world, but for himself, to fill the quiet that had once threatened to swallow him whole. In the beginning, it was the simple act of survival, but as he grew, so did his music. The boy who once sang to get through the night had begun to craft songs that would one day be sung by millions. The echoes of his early struggles, those memories of abandonment and hunger, would be woven into every chord, every lyric. And from the silence he once fought against, Willie Nelson would rise. Willie Nelson's early years weren't just about survival. They were about chasing something bigger, something more. As a boy who had learned to play the guitar with raw, trembling fingers, the music he created became his lifeline. But, as with any dream, the road was not easy, and the struggles that marked his childhood were only the beginning of the long, winding journey ahead. After spending his youth in the cotton fields and singing in bars where the crowds barely noticed him, Willie knew he had a passion for music, but that didn't make the path ahead any easier. His dreams of becoming a country music star seemed almost impossible. The world around him was full of doubt, and he constantly faced rejection, but he never stopped pushing forward. His heart was set on a dream too big for the small town he came from, and he knew he had to leave Abbott, Texas behind if he was ever going to make it. In his early 20s, Willie packed up what little he had, a battered guitar, a notebook full of lyrics, and a hope thin as paper, and drove straight into the heart of Nashville. The city that was supposed to be the mecca of country music didn't exactly welcome him with open arms. At first, Nashville seemed like a place of endless opportunity, but instead of an embrace, he faced doors slamming in his face. Music producers took one look at him, his rough voice, his unpolished look, and turned him away. The Nashville sound was clean, slick, and marketable, and Willie didn't fit that mold. He wasn't a rhinestone cowboy or the polished, pretty-faced singer they were used to. He was raw, gritty, and real. But to them, he was too different. They told him to come back when he sounded like someone else. Willie didn't take this rejection lying down. If anything, it fueled him. But the sting of being told he wasn't good enough lingered. He kept grinding it out, working odd jobs like spinning records on the radio, hauling equipment for other musicians, and even selling encyclopedias door to door. In those lonely, difficult years, Willie faced a harsh truth. The world didn't care about his passion, his struggles, or his dreams. It didn't matter how badly he wanted it. To the outside world, he was just another person with a guitar who couldn't make it big. Yet he never stopped writing. Late at night, in a rented room too small to dream in, Willie would sit by the window and whisper lyrics to himself. Music was the only language he had left, the only thing that still made sense in a world full of rejection. He kept chasing the dream, and while the applause was thin and the crowds were small, every song he wrote, every gig he played, brought him closer to where he needed to be. It wasn't fame he was after, it was something deeper. He sang because he had to. Music wasn't just a career for him, it was his survival. Each note was a reminder that he was still alive, still fighting, still trying to make a mark. In 1962, Willie's breakthrough came, but not in the way he imagined. He sold one of his songs, Family Bible, for just $100. At first, he didn't see it as much, a small price for a song that could barely keep the lights on. But then, it became a hit for another artist, and it brought him a taste of success. But that success wasn't his. The applause, the recognition, it wasn't for him. It was for someone else, someone who'd been in the right place at the right time. That hurt more than the hunger, more than the rejection. The world danced to his pain, but they didn't even know his name. Willie didn't let that defeat him, though. He kept playing, he kept singing, he kept writing. He didn't have a choice. Music wasn't just his passion, it was his reason to keep going. His first marriage had ended in divorce in 1962, but Willie wasn't just left with a broken heart, he was left with a burning desire to prove that he wasn't just a guy who couldn't make it. He was a musician, a poet, and a storyteller who had something important to say. The road didn't get easier. In fact, things got worse. By 1962, he was living in a rusted trailer on the edge of a cemetery, the kind of place where the living were outnumbered by ghosts. He had nothing, no money, no home, no guarantee that the next day would be any better than the one before. But he kept going, kept playing those small gigs in smoky bars, hoping that someday someone would notice the man behind the guitar. The nights were long, filled with whiskey, smoke, and songs that seemed more like confessions than country hits. His health was deteriorating, and the physical toll of the road was starting to weigh on him. But he wouldn't quit. He couldn't. Music was his only friend, his only escape from the isolation. In 1969, Willie's second marriage to Shirley Colley ended as well, adding another layer of loss to his already heavy heart. But in the midst of the pain, something changed. He met Connie Kopka, a woman who would eventually become a part of his life, though not in the way he first expected. At that point, Willie was broken, exhausted, and unsure if he even wanted to find himself anymore. But Connie helped him see something different. She wasn't trying to fix him, she simply accepted him. And for the first time, Willie started to realize that maybe there was still a way out, a way forward. By the early 1970s, things started to shift. Willie had spent over a decade trying to make it in Nashville, but the city hadn't embraced him. It was time to move on. He packed up his bags, his guitar, and his pain, and headed to Austin, Texas. The city was a haven for people who didn't fit into the cookie-cutter mold of country music. Austin was wild, free, and unpolished. It was a place where truth mattered more than image. And for Willie, that was exactly what he needed. Austin gave Willie the freedom to be himself. And in 1973, he released Shotgun Willie. The album was everything Nashville had rejected, raw, honest, and filled with the pain of his struggles. Critics called it reckless, unmarketable, too raw. But the people heard something different. They heard the truth. It was the sound of a man who had fought for everything he had, and in that fight, he found his voice. It wasn't long before he became the face of the outlaw movement in country music. a genre that embraced the rough edges and the real stories that mainstream music had ignored. By 1975, Willie's album Red-Headed Stranger was released, and it became his breakthrough, a multi-platinum hit. It was the turning point in his career, the moment when he stopped chasing the approval of the industry and started creating music for himself. The world finally caught up, and Willie Nelson had arrived, not as the polished country star Nashville wanted, but as the man he had always been, raw, real, and unafraid to sing his truth. The road had been long and filled with rejection, but it had forged Willie into something extraordinary. Every struggle, every failure, and every heartbreak led him to that moment when he could finally breathe, not because the world had accepted him, but because he had accepted himself. The boy who once sang to survive had become the man who sang to show the world what survival really meant. In the early 1970s, Willie Nelson was a man on the edge of greatness, though he didn't know it just yet. He'd already spent decades fighting for a dream that seemed so far out of reach. He had endured rejection, poverty, and heartbreak, but there was still something deep inside him that wouldn't let go of the music. By the time he made the decision to leave Nashville behind and settle in Austin, Texas, he was on the verge of a transformation that would change his life forever. Austin in the early 70s was a wild place, a perfect fit for someone like Willie, who had never quite fit the polished commercial image that Nashville wanted him to have. The city was a melting pot of creativity and rebellion, a place where people didn't care about looking perfect, they cared about the truth. It was exactly what Willie needed to reinvent himself. The music scene there was vibrant, but it wasn't the same as the clean-cut country music world he had struggled to get into. Austin welcomed the outlaws, the misfits, and the truth-tellers. In 1973, Willie released Shotgun Willie, an album that would mark his departure from the country music scene that had been so slow to accept him. This was not a polished commercial album. It was raw, unapologetic, and filled with a raw, gritty honesty that Nashville had rejected. Critics didn't know what to make of it. They called it reckless, unmarketable, and too rough. But the people heard something different. They heard the sound of a man who had lived through the struggles he sang about, and in those struggles they heard a truth they could relate to. The album didn't become an instant commercial success, but it laid the foundation for what was to come. It was the spark that started the fire, and that fire would burn brightly as Willie Nelson's star began to rise. He had become the face of the outlaw movement in country music, a movement that embraced the raw, untamed aspects of life that mainstream country had long ignored. The success of Shotgun Willie was just the beginning. In 1974, Willie followed it up with Phases and Stages, an album that was another step toward defining his sound. It was more experimental, more vulnerable, and it resonated deeply with people who had been following him for years. But it wasn't until 1975, with the release of Red-Headed Stranger, that Willie Nelson would truly become a household name. The album was unlike anything anyone had heard before. It was stripped back, haunting, and completely unapologetic in its simplicity. It was sparse, almost empty in places, but in that emptiness, there was a depth that captivated audiences. Red-Headed Stranger was the album that cemented Willie's place as one of the most important figures in country music. It was a masterpiece that blended traditional country, gospel, and folk with Willie's own personal brand of storytelling. Critics who had once laughed at him were now calling him a genius, and fans were flocking to hear him perform. For the first time, it seemed like everything was falling into place. He had finally found his voice, and the world was listening. But while Willie's career was on the rise, his personal life was starting to crumble. Fame, which had always seemed like the key to his happiness, began to feel more like a prison. He was constantly on the road, playing more than 200 shows a year, his body worn down by the endless travel and performances. The very thing he had fought for, stardom, was now the thing that was slowly tearing him apart. The crowds cheered, the applause was loud, but the loneliness that came with fame was deafening. His first marriage to Martha Matthews had ended long before his rise to fame, but the scars of that failed relationship still lingered in Willie's heart. He had been young and inexperienced, caught up in the whirlwind of music and love, but it hadn't been enough. He wasn't a husband, he was a boy with a guitar, and that realization haunted him for years. His second marriage to Shirley Colley was no different. Fame had only deepened the cracks in their relationship. By 1971, it was over. But even as his personal life fell apart, Willie's music continued to thrive. He had found a second family in his music, in the band he played with, and in the loyal fans who continued to support him. But something was missing. He was writing more music, he was performing more shows, but it wasn't enough. He needed something more than just the applause. He needed love. He needed peace. And in 1971, he met someone who would give him just that. Connie Kopka was different from the women Willie had been with before. She wasn't looking for fame or fortune. She wasn't trying to fix him. She just accepted him for who he was, flaws and all. Their relationship was quiet, but deep. Willie wasn't looking for love, but Connie found him when he wasn't even looking for himself. They had a child together, Paula, in 1971. And though their relationship wasn't perfect, it gave Willie something he hadn't had in a long time, a sense of stability. But even as he built a life with Connie, the pressure of fame and the constant touring continued to take its toll. By 1978, his finances were in trouble, and his life outside of music was starting to fall apart again. He had been living in the fast lane for so long, and now it seemed like everything he had worked for was slipping through his fingers. He had made millions, but he was losing it just as quickly. The endless demands of the road, the high expectations of the industry, and his personal struggles had finally caught up with him. Despite all of this, Willie's career wasn't finished. If anything, he was just getting started. He recorded one of his most successful albums, Stardust, a collection of American standards, and despite the industry's belief that it would ruin his career, it became one of the best-selling albums in country music history. The album was a huge commercial success, but more importantly, it was a turning point for Willie. It was proof that he didn't have to follow the rules of the industry to be successful. He could carve out his own path, and people would follow. But personal struggles continued to haunt him. In 1984, one of his biggest financial disasters hit when a tour lost over $1 million. The headlines blamed mismanagement, but to Willie, it was just life. He had learned to keep going, even when it felt like everything was falling apart. His commitment to his band, to his crew, to his fans was unwavering. He paid every musician, every crew member, even when there wasn't enough money left for himself. The road may have taken its toll on him, but it had also made him stronger. Through it all, Willie continued to release albums, tour, and write songs that would become anthems for generations. His voice was unmistakable, full of soul, heartache, and truth. And even as his personal life remained turbulent, his music was a constant, something that both defined him and set him free. The rise to fame that Willie Nelson had fought for so long had come with a price, one he paid through heartbreak, personal turmoil, and the constant battle to stay grounded in a world that seemed determined to tear him apart. But in the end, Willie proved that no matter how hard the world pushed against him, he wouldn't back down. He would keep singing, keep playing, and keep pushing forward because that's what he had always done. After years of relentless touring, heartbreak, and battling with personal demons, Willie Nelson found himself at a crossroads in his life. The road had been long, winding, and filled with both triumph and pain. But now, in his later years, a sense of peace began to settle over him. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from having everything figured out or being free of struggle. It was a quieter, more profound kind of peace, a peace born from acceptance and redemption. In his early career, the road had always been his constant companion, a source of both excitement and exhaustion. It was the place where he felt alive, where he could escape the weight of his personal life and pour himself into the music. But as the years went on, the road started to feel like a burden. The endless travel, the nights spent away from his family, the physical toll, it all started to take a toll on his health and his soul. It was around this time that Willie began to step back. After decades of chasing fame and success, he started to see the value in slowing down. He moved to a ranch in Spicewood, Texas, a place he had always dreamed of having. It wasn't just a piece of land, it was a sanctuary, a refuge where he could reconnect with the things that truly mattered. It was here that he began to rediscover himself, not the famous musician, not the man plagued by mistakes and regrets, but just Willie, the man who had always loved the simple things in life. The Luck Ranch, as he called it, became his home. He built it with his own hands, and it became more than just a place to live. It was a symbol of redemption, a place where Willie could heal from the wounds of his past. There, surrounded by nature, his animals, and the love of his family, he started to find the peace he had spent most of his life searching for. He would rise early in the morning, walk the fields, and enjoy the quiet that the ranch offered him. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of his earlier life. In this new chapter, Willie embraced a slower, more intentional pace. He wasn't chasing anything anymore. Instead, he focused on what brought him true joy: his family, his music, and his health. He started using cannabis as a way to cope with the physical pain from years of smoking and performing. For him, it wasn't a symbol of rebellion, but a way to survive. It was part of his journey of healing, of finding ways to make peace with his body and his past. His sons, Lucas and Micah, were now grown and carrying on the musical legacy Willie had started, while his wife, Annie, was his steady anchor through it all. Willie's shift in perspective wasn't just about slowing down. It was about understanding that life was no longer something to be fought against. He had learned that real success wasn't measured by awards or fame. It was measured by the moments of quiet contentment that came from living authentically. He had spent so much of his life running, both from the world and from his own emotions, but now he was learning to stay. As Willie found peace in his personal life, his music became more reflective. He started writing songs that spoke of redemption, forgiveness, and the beauty of finding calm in the storm. These weren't the same songs that had once echoed his pain. They were the songs of a man who had made peace with his past and was ready to share that peace with the world. In many ways, Willie's redemption was not just in the music he created, but in the way he lived. The man who once felt lost in the chaos of fame and fortune had found his way back to simplicity. He no longer sought approval from the world. Instead, he sought truth, love, and understanding. Through his struggles, Willie Nelson had found a new beginning, a life where peace, family, and music could coexist without the pressure of perfection. It was a redemption that proved that no matter how far someone might fall, it's always possible to rise again.